Hi everyone, welcome back. Today's video is going to be a decluttering video, but a little bit differently. I'm not going to be like wading through my makeup like these videos usually are. I'm instead going to be talking about 5 eyeshadow palettes that I'm getting rid of and why. Most of these I probably mentioned in some capacity before, usually to say I'm no longer interested in it, but I want to talk a little bit more about why I'm removing it from my collection. These palettes will be going to friends or family or even coworkers sometimes, so they're not necessarily going to be going to waste, but I don't need them in my collection anymore, so they gotta go. The first one I'm going to talk about is one that I don't actually have anymore because I've already passed it on to a coworker of mine, and that's the Urban Decay Naked Cherry Palette. Now, you probably just saw a few weeks ago that I posted a review video on it with 5 looks and swatches, and my thoughts are pretty much summed up in that video, but I just felt it was so same. They launched a 12-pan eyeshadow palette, and every look that I made with it looked like I used the same 4 eyeshadows. I was so infuriated by the end of using that palette to create 5 looks for that video that I was just like, why have they released this? They could have put it out in a 6-pan eyeshadow palette and it would have been perfectly fine. I realized that they're making money under the Naked brand, but I was so irritated because they'd already run through this problem with the Naked Heat palette, although those colors appealed to me a little bit more. And so why would they replicate the same problem with Naked Cherry? And even worse is that Naked Cherry is not even a good representation of what is presented in that palette. It's not very cherry. It's more like, oh, who was it that said, somebody said it could have been called Naked Blossom. And I totally agree with that. That would have made so much more sense. I think it was Ludo who said that. That would have worked so much better. Call it something like flowery, like Naked Blossom, and it would have worked. Naked Cherry makes absolutely no sense to me. Anyway, a coworker had seen me either using the palette or I'd done a few eye looks with it, and they were like, oh, that's a really pretty palette. And I was like, do you want it? Because I'm gonna do this review, but at the end of the day, I don't need it in my collection. And if you want it, I'm more than happy to give it to you. So I gave it to her after I finished that video, and I think she was really happy to receive it, and I was more than happy to give it to her because I want somebody to be excited about the makeup that they're gonna use. And for me to stick with using that palette, I mean, I probably just wouldn't have. It would have sat on my shelf with my other Naked palettes and it would become dusty and neglected because I would never have reached for that palette. So I'm really disappointed in that palette. I feel like it was a missed opportunity. I mean, I think they just need to do away with the whole Naked series. They could have just called this the Urban Decay Cherry Palette and actually put red colors in it, and I would have been so pumped about that. But as Naked Cherry, this one really missed the mark for me, and I really just did need to make yet another pink toned eyeshadow look that matched all the other ones that I'd made. So that one's gone from my collection and I'm very happy to see it go. So that was the only one that I didn't actually have on hand, but the rest I do have the physical palettes for. The next one I'm going to talk about is a release by, yeah, it's Sigma. I don't really buy much from Sigma, but this is the Creme de Couture palette, and it was a relaunch palette. I initially missed when this came out, ooh, I don't even know, 5 years ago? I missed when it came out because I wasn't really buying no-name brands online back then. I really only stuck to whatever was available at Sephora. And I didn't buy it because I was like, well, the shipping to Canada is gonna be a lot, and then there's customs and blah, 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 blah. So I never picked it up. They relaunched it, I think last Christmas for whatever reason, and I was so excited. I was like, yes, I'm gonna pick this up. I finally get my hands on it and it will no longer be the one that got away. Except I don't like it. I don't like it. These are all patchy and powdery and they just don't apply very well. I mean, the color selection is holy, like, this is beautiful. Looking at this on its own, I'm just like, you're perfect. You're so perfect. But in application, it's really friggin' terrible. Like, it's just really bad. Everything goes on not very pigmented. I mean, you can get some pigment, but they stick to certain areas of your eye, and then it goes really patchy if you try to blend it with another one. And that's potentially because these are all matte shadows, but they're all like neon pastels. So they've got the chalkiness factor from being a neon. They've got the white, like, again, chalk factor from being a pastel color. So I feel like it's just a bad combination overall. I've seen a few people loving this. X Sparkage, who actually influenced me to buy this, has produced some beautiful looks out of this, but I can't get it to work. And I am so annoyed because I look at this thing and I want to love it so desperately. I've gone back to it a few times, like trying to convince myself that you will make it work this time and now you will love it, but it's a disaster. Every single time I use this, it's a freaking disaster. So I just need to get rid of this. Somebody else can try to use this and maybe they'll have better luck than I do, but oh, I just love you. Like looking at you physically, you're so pretty, but you are terrible. The next palette is not one that has a quality issue. It's just purely based on the fact that these are not the kind of colors that I reach for. And I'm kind of tired of just seeing it sit there in my collection, dusty and lonely. So I'm talking about the Lorac Unzipped Gold palette. The shadows in here are beautiful to look at. Although I do feel like there's a lot of same colors in here. Like I think this could have just been like cut in half and you would have basically gotten the exact same look. They're soft, they're pigmented, they're buttery, they apply smoothly, but there's just not a lot of intrigue in this palette for me. It's basically a warm tone gold palette with some matte brown shades. And I have that in plenty of other palettes that I don't need to own this one. And I wonder too if some of this is not as interesting to me because I'm fair/light. My friend Sam wears this, or she used to wear this quite a bit, and the colors really popped on her skin. And I wonder if that's just because she's simply a darker tone than me and the tones came out better on her, because whenever I put this on, I'm like, okay, yeah, you're just a boring gold eye. So yeah, it's not for me. I'm sad because I do really love the packaging. Like this is some of the most perfect packaging in the world to me. Cardboard, super slim, and it's got a mirror. That is like the best packaging as far as I'm concerned, but I just don't reach for the shadows in this whatsoever. So it's time to pass this one on. The next one pains me. It's by Urban Decay. It's their full spectrum palette. And I picked it up as soon as it launched at Sephora, I think 2 years ago now. I got it because it's a freaking rainbow palette and I was so excited to see Urban Decay not launching yet another naked palette at the time. So I grabbed it and I was so pumped. Like I was so excited to get my hands on this. And then every look that I created with it was kind of like, eh. Like it was okay, but it was never really that good. The shadows themselves are also just like they're okay, but again, not the best I've ever tried by Urban Decay. Urban Decay makes great eyeshadows. For the most part, the quality is fantastic. I know I talked about getting rid of the Naked Cherry palette, but that was purely based on the colors that they had in that palette. It was not a quality issue. These ones in here are just kind of like, sometimes they're flaky, sometimes they're not pigmented, sometimes they kind of stick to areas. Like it was just a really weird mishmash. And even now looking at this, I'm quite enticed by the color spectrum in here, but I know that I've tried this at least 6 or 7 times. Every single time I was like, ugh, it just never really came out the way I was expecting it to. And the other reason why I'm kind of, I don't want to say infuriated because that makes it sound really dramatic. This launched at $70 Canadian, which is high. I think 70 bucks is high for a palette, but there was so much color in here. I was like, well, whatever, and it's a holiday palette, yada, yada, yada. It launched at 70 bucks and I think it was at like 35 days after I'd purchased this, so I could no longer return it to Sephora for a full refund. They dropped the price in half. I was so mad, so mad. So I paid 70 bucks for this and it must not have sold at all because literally 35 days later it was then 35 bucks and I was like, oh my god. You couldn't have just waited until the holiday season was over before you reduced the price of this palette. I mean, it must have sold horrendously, like not at all, because to drop a price tag that quickly, I've never seen it happen. That's absolutely unreal. So I'm pretty bitter towards this palette simply because of that price drop, but also because the shadows just never really turned out that well. And it's really disappointing because when I think of Urban Decay, I don't think of the Urban Decay of today that's very naked palette focused. I remember the Urban Decay before the naked palettes were around and it was like grungy and smoky and colorful and things that were unique and new. And this was more in line with that. It's more bright than what I used to think of them, but it was still something different for them. And I think it's sad because the brand is clearly kind of having a bit of an identity crisis. Like the naked stuff is making them bank for sure. But I feel like this is sort of where they used to come from, and I want them to go back to something like this with better quality. But I don't think that's the kind of stuff that's making them money. So they're kind of stuck making naked palettes, but like still wanting to make something a little bit more unique. And I just want the unique stuff, but with better quality. And the last one I'm going to talk about is another Lorac product. And I've just realized that I've had 2 Lorac palettes and 2 Urban Decay palettes in this video. That was not planned whatsoever. So this one is the Mega Pro 2. And I got this probably purely because I missed out on the Mega Pro 1. So when I was in the US and I saw this at Ulta, I picked it up basically without asking any questions. I just wanted to own one of these massive palettes by Lorac. And I'll be honest, when I first looked at this in Ulta, I was kind of like, the colors aren't that exciting, but you really want to try like Lorac's formula. I actually don't know if I had the Unzipped Gold when I bought this or if I bought that afterwards. So I got this because I had missed out on Mega Pro 1, and I really did like the concept that they had with the Mega Pro 1 that replicated in this one, where it's like 2 matte rose and 2 shimmery rose. And there were some colors in here that I was drawn towards, like the purples up here. This is a really nice looking like lavender purple. I did like some of the blue and the gold down here and the tangerine up here, but that's like, what, 5 or 6 shadows in this whole thing that I've just pointed to that interested me. I don't know why I grabbed it, aside from the fact that I just missed out on Mega Pro 1 and I felt like, you know, maybe this is gonna be the next big one. And I've used it a few times and the quality is fine overall, but it's one of those things that I put together a look and I'm like, yeah, but you're kind of boring. So there's nothing inherently wrong with this palette, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that love this kind of thing, but it's just not for me. And I know that the Mega Pro 1 did come back in stock, was it last year? And after having used this, I looked at that palette more critically and I was like, you're not nearly as interesting as I thought you were, because I kind of built it up in my head, you know, as another one of those palettes that got away. And I think the only color that I was interested in the Mega Pro 1 was like that cranberry red shade. And that's literally the shadow that drew me to the entire palette, which is kind of ridiculous. So I decided not to buy the Mega Pro 1 based on my experience with the Mega Pro 2. So this kind of like, you know, saved me that heartache, but I just need to pass this one on and someone else will for sure be happy with this. So those are the 5 eyeshadow palettes that I'm gonna pass on to people that I know. And it was nice to sort of clear them out of my collection. It creates more of a, I don't know, like it removes a weight from yourself. I don't feel inundated by my makeup in general. I only feel inundated by products that I don't utilize. I use a lot of my makeup on the regular. My collection's quite big, but I use a lot of products all at once. These were ones that were just sitting there and probably hadn't been touched in about a year. So I figured it's time to just get rid of them, remove that sort of weight of the makeup from myself, and give them to somebody who's gonna enjoy them a lot more than I have. So that's it for this video. Thanks so much for joining me as I decluttered a few eyeshadow palettes, and I will catch you next time. Bye.